Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. To all of the members and the guests, thank you for your participation. I come at this line of questions from my own experience as a federal prosecutor. I have actually engaged in surveillance of American citizens through a process called the Title III wiretap. And the level of protections that are required to get to the actual flipping of the switch, it's fairly astounding. Obviously, it's one of the more intrusive investigative techniques, so you have to demonstrate necessity, you have to demonstrate why other techniques are futile. Candidly, once we would go to trial or once we would charge the case, the rigor that we had to exercise was very important for a number of reasons. It was, obviously, it kept the internal investigators accountable. It kept the process, once the investigation was ongoing, it kept it open and honest. They knew that their actions were going to be subject to pen and paper. They were going to be subject to judicial review, and then obviously with opposing counsel, they would review it. But also, when we would go to court, and if there was a jury trial, the jury themselves would know these actions, this evidence was collected with sufficient predication. And I do find it somewhat, I would say, I don't want to say troubling yet, but it is amazing to me that there's so much resistance to the warrant requirement alone. And in that vein, with the Title III wiretap on one side, I'm very familiar with how the evidence is collected, how it's stored, how it's accessed. Mr. Trnowski, if you could explain with the 702 program and the FISA court, how is the data that's collected under that subsection, how is it, again, collected, stored, and then accessed?
Does
that make sense, just tactically and in a physical server? Like how is it collected and stored and accessed?
Yeah, so it is stored on a secure server, and the backdoor search loophole is, I think, what really is why this is so important, right? Because this is basically allowing the government's ability to search the communications that they've incidentally collected, or as Chair Jordan has referred to it, incidental, collection of Americans' information during the surveillance of foreign targets, all without a warrant, right?
Right.
So this warrant requirement that we've been advocating for adds that necessary layer of protection, because as you pointed out, as we're using warrants basically as a procedural matter of demonstrating like why we got to where we got. And that's really important that when we're talking about foreigners, like that's fine if we're gonna go and engage in surveillance, but once those surveillance powers turn inward and we're trying to tap into that data that we have collected, that we have that warrant process carried out, so that way we have due process.
And when that much information is readily available,
yeah,
the natural trend throughout history, regardless of who's in power, obviously people on my side of the aisle are very distrustful given what happened with President Trump. Yeah. But there have been conservative abuses when we're in power, without question.
Absolutely.
And in regards to that information, how easy is it to access once it's collected?
It's fairly easy for people to go and access that, and that's why we've seen through the litany of abuses as to why that information needs to have a better tightened control. Now, admittedly, as Representative Lee was talking about, they've done some limited changes in RISA to go and talk about what kinds of members of the FBI can go and query that data, but we believe that that's still not sufficient. This is why we want that warrant requirement, so that way we can have that procedural accountability of who's tapping into it and be able to have that necessary.
Is there any way with the current technology infrastructure to determine how often that material is accessed and by whom?
Right now, I think that it is a challenge in its own right because we don't have full transparency into who's querying it.
It's a huge problem.
It's a massive problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yes, absolutely, Representative.
Mr. Scheer, let me talk to you real quickly. In regards to, you mentioned earlier that you work with Carter Page. That obviously highlights a lot of abuses, again, for political purposes. Right. Which is what the Fourth Amendment is designed, in part, to protect against. What type of penalties, what type of deterrences are there for the law enforcement community if they abuse the 702 access and information currently?
Well, currently for one thing, there's no personal liability. Yep. If somebody abuses that system. There's only the potential for liability against the government itself if you can jump through the necessary hoops.
But given how opaque this process is, that's very hard to build a case against.
It's very difficult.
Yes. I mean, in the Title III wiretap affidavit, if you lie, if you submit false information, you'll be charged. You could lose your law license, right, et cetera.
Right, and we don't yet have those kinds of protections in the 702 area. We moved a lot closer to them with RISA, but.
Yep. Well, I could go a lot longer, but Mr. Chair, 5 minutes goes very fast.
Yeah,